a national election is something that none of us have ever seen anything like.
This is not about Republicans or Democrats. Both of those have to eat.
What it comes down to is, what do we want the soul of America to look like over the next 4 years?
This election is going to be important in shaping, I think, what the world thinks about America and about where America is headed.
Yes, the world is watching what we do.
We love Mississippi.
In 64 and 65, when the you heard them talk about Freedom Summer.
Hear that free.
Julius Harris and others in Panola County well remember the time when it was almost impossible for a black person to register to vote in Mississippi.
They would go in and the circuit clerk would ask people, the Afro-American, how many bubbles was in a bar of soap, or how many grains of sugar was in a 5-pound bag of sugar or something like that. They would ask all kind of idiotic questions of that to the Afro-American voter.
If you did register, if you did attempt to register, you're gonna face some stiff consequences.
The harsh fact is that in many places in this country, men and women are kept from voting simply because they are Negroes. Their cause must be our cause too.
Finally, in 1965, Congress passed the Voting Rights Act, which eliminated the poll tax and other measures to keep blacks from voting.
If every time that people gained some power, the ones that didn't want you to have any power always trying to figure out a way they can take it back.
And that's the issue many people in Mississippi have with today's voter ID law. Voter ID requires everyone who votes to present a form of identification. Supporters say the law works and helps reduce voter fraud.
Folks were walking in from another county and claim they were that person, and they could vote. They didn't have to show an ID. They could say, "Yeah, I'm Richard Jones, and that's me right there on the books." They know somebody's dead.
The voter ID law in Mississippi is reasonable. We have fallbacks for people who don't have a driver's license with their picture on, all that sort of stuff. So even if somebody doesn't meet the absolute letter of the law, there are mechanisms for them to still try to vote a ballot and come back and prove their identity while that ballot is being held.
As Secretary of State, Delbert Hoseman oversees elections in Mississippi.
And get you a free photo voter ID. Are there any questions? We carded the governor. They carded me. So they're carding everybody. I think we're all treated the same.
He needs an ID.
Oh, you're right.
Even President Obama had to show ID.
I got my driver's license.
In 2016, 37 states had some form of voter ID laws. That does not include North Carolina, which in 2016 overturned its voter ID.
It's a crime that we stand here 27 days after the 50th anniversary of the signing of the Voting Rights Act, and we have less voting rights.
Other states have tried to do the same, arguing that the laws suppress minority voting.
More than a dozen states will have either new or newly beefed up voter ID laws for the first time during a presidential election. Critics claim the laws are meant to suppress the minority vote and point to studies like this one from the University of California, San Diego, which concluded, quote, "Our analysis shows that strict identification laws have a differentially negative impact on the turnout of Hispanics, blacks, Asian Americans, and multiracial Americans in primaries and general elections. We also find that voter ID laws skew democracy toward those on the political right."
Voter ID is an effort on the part of the ruling class and white people, white legislators, to make it difficult for people of color to vote. The voter ID has been focused on African Americans because the Republican Party, which is in power in this state and many other states, want to push down and oppress the black vote.
I'm from a poor community where a lot of people don't have access to go to the DMV and get driver's license and go to the polls and things like that, because there aren't measures that consider poor people to redistrict lines and do things like that make it harder for people to vote. I think it's an abuse of power, and I think that's what we've been seeing.
More than 1 million people in Mississippi voted in the 2016 presidential election, and no problems were reported.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I voted in my first presidential election, and I don't know, I guess it feels really powerful to vote for someone that I really believe in and I think will do a lot of great in this country. So, I don't know, feeling really good.
The system seems to work because the state offers 10 different options for identification.
We were the only state that didn't get sued in the country. Texas got sued, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Dakota, all of them got sued, North Carolina. We didn't get sued. Mississippians trusted each other and went to the polls, and we voted. 99.7% of people showed up with an ID. So it's not about the voter ID that would be a real crisis anymore. Mississippians have passed that. We've turned the page on that history, I think, on a lot of voting history in Mississippi.
If you're going to have problems with the election problems that I've seen, well, throughout the country is in the absentees. It's not in people going to the polls. And especially now that we have, you have to present your photo ID, even a name duplication. That's the only issue we had with people with the same names. We
were later coming to the party as far as implementing the voter ID, and I believe our law is a little better. We kind of did something right here. We looked at where problems were with other states, and we avoided those problems.
But not everyone agrees, especially those who remember the days when voting in Mississippi was not colorblind.
This racism that we experienced back then is continuing on until this day. No doubt about it.
Being able not to participate in the political process, but yet and still you had to put your hand on your heart and quote, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the republic for which you stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I always circle that all when they talk about when they said all. And it was the only way that you can really visualize it, you had to experience it. You had to experience it.
It looks like a typical farm in the Mississippi Delta, and sounds like one too.
We'll wake up at 6, eat breakfast, get the cooler ready. We'll go to the combine, service them up, and when the dew is all dried up, we'll start cutting, and we'll cut up until we can't cut no more, I guess. So it will be about 11, 12 at night, maybe sometimes 1, and then you'll quit, get into the pickup, go back to the campers, take a shower and sleep.
But look closer. This company employs 12 South Africans like Henko and couldn't survive without them. It's part of an international program that bar harvesting has used since 2000.
Bar harvesting has been here for 60 years. And if this program plays out, bar harvesting will cease. It'll be cut down to where me and my brother and just a couple of guys can run 1 or 2 combines instead of 13 combines and 7 trucks. Like I say, I don't hire all South, I hire all I can American. But if I can't count on the heart of my crew as being these guys, I'm finished.
We will build a great wall along the southern border.
Immigration has become a major story in this election, but it's not just a national issue. It also affects Mississippi. The state immigrant population has doubled just since 2013. There are an estimated 63,000 legal immigrants, and that doesn't include those here illegally.
We think that there's close to 200,000 Latinos alone. There's also a significant undercount of all the other nationalities that are here. So I think we have a significant number of immigrants here that are not counted.
Bill Chandler runs the Mississippi Immigrants' Rights Alliance, or MIRA. The group fights for the rights of immigrants, whether legal or illegal.
In Mississippi, we've had a long history of attempts to make life miserable for immigrants.
Somebody's got to be in that combine driving it, or it's not doing anything.
More people than ever before are interested in learning more about where their food comes from and how it gets from farm to table.
Most of the immigrants who come to Mississippi work in agriculture. No one knows that better than Mississippi Farm Bureau President Mike McCormick.
There's a crisis of farm labor all across the United States. Over the last 10 years, the available workforce for farmers have declined over 20%. And while some people may tell you that this guest worker program, these guest workers are competing with workers here in the United States, that's just simply not the truth. No one wants those jobs. They're very hard, labor-intensive work.
The jobs they generally take are low-wage, low-paying jobs. And we already have, I think, an unemployment problem, so you're going to take jobs from the lowest folks.
This is not about Republicans or Democrats. Both of those have to eat and enjoy eating, and if we're going to do that, we're going to have immigration reform that includes a guest worker program, an H-2A program that works.
The bigger question is what to do with the immigrants who are already here, some of whom come to Mississippi to work for only a few months.
Hey, they love their country. They're just here to try to make a living. They're not trying to live here. You know, well, of course some of them would. It's America. But for the most part, they've got families, and a lot of these guys are farm families from over there.
We're not just any workers for them. They do treat us like family, and they look after us like their own kids.
Nobody wants to just, here in the United States, have a job for 2 or 3 months and then go look for something else.
Both Barr and McCormick agree that Mississippi needs immigration reform for guest workers and those who decide to stay.
One party has one idea on what we need to do, one has an extreme on the other side. What Farm Bureau is asking for is at some point in time we're going to sit down and talk about sensible immigration reform, and Farm Bureau wants a seat at the table to represent our farmers to say, we have a program that's broken. The United States citizen demands that our food is produced safely and affordably here in the United States, and that we need to sit down with these groups that have rhetoric on both sides of the aisle and come up with a program that works.
Immigration needs to be about legal immigration, and we need to put a stop to illegal immigration. But if you make it impossible for people to come here, then you're going to always have people trying to stay here illegally or come here illegally.
In his travels across the U.S. working with immigrants and migrants, Chandler has seen all kinds of reform measures.
Every single law that was passed since the late 1800s has been designed to manipulate labor and to prevent immigrants from having any kind of political or economic power.
What sense would it make to take somebody who'd been here 15 years, had the same job for the last 10 years, and send them home and then try to find somebody to replace them with that you'd have to train and start all over?
Many of them don't want to go home. Some of the South Africans at Bar Harvesting got married and stayed in the U.S. More than anyone, they can appreciate the challenges of immigrants in Mississippi.
There's a lot of racism in America. You guys just didn't give it a name like us. We called it apartheid, but yeah, that's something you'll have to sort out by yourself, I guess. It's hard because you pay a lot of money to come over this way, and they just jump a fence or swim a river. But I guess they also have to live. They also have to make money for their families, and they can't do it back where they are. So I guess they're just doing it for their families like us.
love that y'all are doing this.
2 days after the election, a lonely few held vigil on the University of Mississippi campus. Some college Democrats and some from the new popular resistance movement created by Ole Miss student Jazz Brisack.
I think that a lot of people are very upset about this election. My stomach itself has been in knots. I wish more millennials would vote and register to vote, because if we decided the election, there are all those maps showing it would have been almost completely blue or completely blue based on like a couple of different sites.
Let me thank all of you for being part of the political revolution.
Brisack created the popular resistance movement after Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race. At that point, college students felt the system had failed them.
Bernie Sanders, I think, just is everybody's really cool grandpa almost. I mean, not to trivialize, he does have a lot of really great policies that really resonated.
Did you get into the race thinking, well, obviously I'll be the young hip choice?
To some extent, we have lost some of the McCarthyite fear, I think, that has pushed others before us away from actually admitting to liking socialism, or some of the prejudice that would have prevented us from voting for a Jewish candidate in the past. The results of the general election are worse, but at that time I didn't think that anything would be worse than Bernie not getting the Democratic nomination.
Brisack is a millennial, young, educated, and liberal, among other things.
The millennial stereotype drives me nuts, because I feel like we have a reputation as a tech-obsessed generation that can't spend 5 minutes without looking at a smartphone.
The millennial stereotype would be someone that's entitled and has kind of a shorter attention span.
People don't give millennials enough credit for looking forward and trying to do things that actively allow us to move forward and out of this weighty Mississippi history that we've always been associated with.
After Sanders dropped out, Green Party candidate Jill Stein pushed his message forward. It attracted many disappointed young people.
To my mind, maybe it's just from being a mother on fire. You know, there's nothing more important than our younger generation. And we need to ensure that they have the education they need to survive, and the health care, and the jobs, and the climate. And this is just like a no-brainer. We need a world that's going to work for our younger generation. The two major political parties, they act like you don't exist, you know? But the millennials are the elephant in the room. This is like the engine of social change. This is the engine of our economy. This is how we transform the future, as we must in every generation.
These problems that millennials are sometimes said to be whining about are real, and that they want real change to happen.
I campaigned for Hillary and Democrats because ultimately I did know Jill Stein was not going to win the election. I never thought that she was going to do that. I just thought that getting her message out and her issues out was really important.
That's 19-year-old Weston Lindeman, and he's the at-large Bernie Sanders delegate for Mississippi.
Weston Lindeman also knew Sanders wasn't going to win. The Millsap student went to the Democratic National Convention as an at-large delegate for Bernie Sanders.
I felt like it was very important that a millennial represents a delegate from Mississippi for Bernie Sanders, just because that's so much of his campaign, and his campaign's all about the progress for the future, and millennials stood behind that. That was a great experience. I had the opportunity to see basically every notable Democratic politician in politics right now, and it was great to see President Obama, Joe Biden, all of the big names, and really just get to experience history in passing the most progressive platform ever, in seeing the first woman nominated to a major party. That was a huge historic moment to be a part of.
Eventually, Lindeman switched his support to Hillary Clinton. He took a semester off from school to work for her campaign in North Carolina.
Well, coming into it, I guess I had this bigger ego thinking I was like the youngest person to show up, but there were a lot of other young people there who, we were all sort of like trying to figure out everything together, and so it was great to see so many millennials there, and it really gave me hope that this is, there's going to be a movement in the future of progressive ideas, that we're really going to see that shift in society, I think.
Such idealism is not shared by all millennials. Even though 18 to 29-year-olds are now the largest single voting bloc in the country, fewer millennials voted this time around compared to 2012.
If you don't vote, right, they sort of either take your vote for granted or take for granted that you won't vote, and then they don't have to make policies specifically designed to you, right? And so, again, if we think back to Sanders, I think his attempt was a specific attempt to get more people to participate. And it happened to be the case that it was millennials, but it was also other individuals too who had felt a little bit turned off by both parties, really.
Trying to understand why some people vote and why some people don't, right?
Millennials and Gen Xers are caring more, their voice should be heard, and that might translate into the parties shifting in accord with them, right? The more you vote, the more likely candidates and parties are to respond to you, right? If you don't vote, right, they sort of either take your vote for granted or take for granted that you won't vote, and then they don't have to make policies specifically designed to you.
If you don't get involved, you don't have a voice. The fact of the matter is that everyone has a voice through their vote, but one vote isn't the kind of voice I want to have. If you want your voice to hold real weight, you have to get involved and you have to get loud.
Millennials don't vote because they don't think politics serves their interests. But the problem with that thinking is politics don't serve your interests because you don't vote.
Even so, millennials believe their voice was heard in this election and will grow louder in coming years.
I think that we have a unique power as millennials, minority and majority, to engage that didn't exist before and to come up with solutions that help more people in different ways that didn't exist before as well.
Well, I think in the next years you'll see, as the baby booming generation does move out of this country, you'll have your millennials come in, and your millennials will determine the direction of this country, and whether that means we have a Democrat presidency for the next 20 years or we have a Republican president for the next 20 years.
I plan to be on the ballot in 2019 for state representative, and in the meantime I'm going to fight for progressive ideas right here in Mississippi, and hopefully we'll pass Proposition 60 next year. That'll be to legalize marijuana recreationally in the state of Mississippi and decriminalize it. So hopefully that'll be on the ballot and we'll get a choice to vote for that next November.
Our generation, we might seem really split at times, and it might seem like, we aren't completely behind each other at all times. But what I'm excited about is to see, for the first time in my life at least, the young people having possibly the most powerful voice in our country.
It's imperative that people become involved in voting in our country, in the everyday life of process. People should go out and want to make change in their own city. Just because you're one person doesn't mean you can't change your country. You can, and one person can change the world. So my hope would be, regardless of who wins, people finally take seriously their right as a citizen of this country and use it to make a difference.
The hardest thing, it's just getting used to being away from your family and friends and the food. We have a lot better food back home, I will say.
The political process might seem daunting, and it might seem like it doesn't really matter, and that, if you're a blue or green or even yellow voter in red Mississippi, that your vote doesn't really matter. But I think you'd be surprised what can happen when you and everyone you know goes out to vote.
We did play a role in this election, and that we can continue to play greater roles in subsequent elections, partly because there will be more and more of us coming of age.
ideas are changing in America and policy is going to change, but at the same time, people are sort of at a crossroads in deciding what they want America to be.
We have a unique power as millennials, minority and majority, to engage that didn't exist before and to come up with solutions that help more people in different ways that didn't exist before as well.
I think we're fixing to have a South African Sunday school class at church, but they're just really pleasant guys. The community loves them. Our community has really taken them in because they're just really good guys.